My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 33. For my parents' 35th anniversary, I drove 6 hours with a gift wrapped in silver ribbon. Before I could even set it down, Dad looked at me from across the room and said, "We didn't think you were coming." Sandra organized all of this. Then Mom slid my gift to the edge of the table and said, "We don't need anything from the daughter who chose to leave us behind." I picked it up and I walked out. When they found out what was inside, what it cost me, what it meant, and who had actually been keeping the lights on in that house for 4 years, they drove 11 hours straight to my front door. Before I take you back to the beginning, if this story stays with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if it genuinely means something. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I really do read them. Now let me take you back 4 years, to the day I found out my parents were 2 months away from losing everything. I grew up in Milford, Texas. Population just under 3,000, not counting the ones who left for college and never looked back. My father, Robert Bennett, managed inventory at a farm supply warehouse. My mother, Helen, cleaned houses 3 days a week and ran the church bake sale every spring without fail. My older sister Sandra, 5 years ahead of me in age and apparently in everything else, was the gravitational center of our household. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's simply the truth. Sandra was magnetic. She walked into a room and conversations shifted toward her the way sunflowers track light. She had opinions about everything and delivered them like announcements. I was quieter, more comfortable in the background. I did well in school but never made a production of it. Sandra brought home trophies. I brought home report cards and left them on the kitchen counter where they'd sit until Mom filed them away. Dad had a line he'd use at family cookouts. He'd point his sweet tea toward Sandra, then swing it lazily in my direction and say, "Sandra got the spark. Claire got, well, Clara's Clara." The adults always laughed. The cousins laughed. I laughed too because what else do you do when you're 10 years old and the punchline? By the time I was 17, the joke hadn't changed. Neither had the crowd. I studied education, got my degree, earned a counseling certification, and accepted a position at a middle school in Seattle, Washington. I packed my life into 3 bags and a folding bookshelf and drove northwest without looking back. The morning I left, Mom was in the kitchen reheating coffee. I stood in the doorway with my car keys in my hand and said, "Bye, Mom." She glanced up, said, "Drive safe," and turned back to the stove. It was July 3rd, my birthday. I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because staying had begun to feel like slowly becoming invisible and I was already most of the way gone. The first year in Seattle, I called home every Sunday at 6 in the evening. Like clockwork. Mom picked up roughly half the time. Dad almost never did. By year 2, the calls rolled to voicemail more often than not. I mentioned it to Sandra in a text once. "They're just busy," she wrote. Then a few days later, "You know how it is. Dad thinks you abandoned the family for some city job." I sent birthday presents, a hand-stitched wall calendar I spent 3 weekends making for Mom's kitchen, Christmas boxes. I never received a single acknowledgement. When I asked Sandra about the calendar, she paused, then said, "I think it might have gotten lost. Or maybe thrown away." "I'm really sorry, Clara." That sentence sat in my chest like something swallowed wrong. Then one February, Aunt Grace, Mom's older sister, called me out of the blue. We talked for a while about nothing in particular when she said, almost as an aside, "Your mother absolutely loves that calendar you made. It's hanging right next to the refrigerator. She tells everyone you made it by hand." I went quiet. Grace, Vivian, Sandra, told me it got thrown away. A long pause. Then carefully, "That's not what happened, sweetheart." She didn't say more. And I didn't push her, not that day. But something cracked open inside me. A sliver of light through a wall I'd assumed was solid. I started paying closer attention to what Sandra said versus what was actually true. The gap between those two things kept widening. I had no proof of anything yet. Just the particular unease you feel when someone's been quietly rearranging your life and telling you it was always that way. The call came on a Wednesday morning in early March 4 years ago. I was at my desk reviewing student files when my phone buzzed. Aunt Grace. Her voice was controlled in the way voices get when someone is working to stay calm. "Clara, I need you to hear something. Your parents are behind on the mortgage. 2 months. The bank sent a final notice last week." I set my pen down. "How serious?" "Serious enough that they could lose the house before summer if nothing changes. Sandra told them she'd handle it." But Grace, I haven't seen any evidence of that, and your father won't discuss it with anyone. That night I sat at my kitchen table and stared at nothing for a long time. Then I called the bank. Lone Star Savings, the branch in Milford. I asked to be connected to whoever handled residential mortgage accounts. They put me through to a man named James Wyatt. Branch manager. Measured voice. Patient. I explained who I was and asked about the account status. He confirmed the 2 months of missed payments. Foreclosure proceedings were beginning. Then he said something that stopped me cold. Actually, Miss Bennett, someone called last week. Said they were family, said they'd get it sorted out. He paused. But no payment ever came through. I already knew who that was. Sandra had called, made a promise, and sent nothing. And that was the first moment I understood that my sister wasn't careless. She was deliberate. I told James the first wanted to set up recurring payments from my account. Monthly. And I needed it kept completely confidential. Not my parents, not my sister, not anyone. He agreed. I called Grace that evening and said 5 words. Don't tell anyone. Especially Sandra. $1,400 a month. That's what invisible love looks like in practice. I was making a decent salary as a school counselor. Decent, not comfortable. After rent, groceries, my student loans, and the new mortgage payment, I had maybe $150 left each month for everything else. So I made adjustments. I stopped eating out. I shopped at thrift stores. When my laptop needed replacing, I bought a refurbished one and prayed it lasted. I turned the heat down 2 degrees and bought an extra blanket. Marcus Webb, my partner, a structural engineer with a calm and methodical way of seeing the world, figured out what I was doing within about 6 weeks. Not because I told him, but because he noticed the spreadsheet. He sat down on the edge of the bed one evening and said, "It's your parents' house, isn't it?" Not a question. A recognition. I nodded. He didn't tell me I was making a mistake. He didn't ask me to stop. He said, "Then we eat at home and I fix the bathroom faucet myself." That was Marcus. No dramatics. Just adjustments and a level head. For 4 years I worked. I took on private tutoring in the evenings. I picked up weekend workshops at the community center. Every month, $1,400 left my account and traveled to a small house on Crestwood Lane in Milford, Texas. Every month, the balance on that mortgage got a little smaller. My parents never called. Not on my birthday. Not at Christmas. Not when I was promoted to lead counselor. But the foreclosure notices stopped, and the house on Crestwood Lane stayed standing. I never asked for a thank you. I didn't know someone else was already collecting it on my behalf. Aunt Grace was my only real line into what was happening back in Milford. She'd call me every few weeks. Careful not to say too much, careful not to say too little. Then one evening about 18 months in, her voice changed. Firmer. Tired. "I need to tell you something, Clara. You're not going to like it." Sandra had told my parents that she was the one paying the mortgage. Not helping, paying. The full amount, every month, all on her own. Grace told me that Dad stood up at Easter dinner. The whole extended family there, cousins, neighbors, the pastor, and raised his glass. To Sandra he said, "The only one in this family who actually shows up." Everyone applauded. Mom wept. Sandra smiled and said, "It's the least I could do, Dad. You do the same for me." $1,400 a month. Every cent from my checking account in Seattle. And my sister was sitting in their dining room absorbing the credit like warmth from a fire she hadn't built. But it didn't stop there. Grace told me that Sandra used that new standing, this borrowed halo, to get herself added to my parents' joint accounts, to take over the household finances, to have her name put on the insurance documents. All with Dad's grateful blessing. "She's positioning herself," Grace said flatly. "And your parents are handing her every key they have." I felt sick. But I didn't call them. I didn't expose her. I told myself, as long as the house is safe, the credit doesn't matter. Then Grace told me what Dad had said to my cousin Denise at a family lunch. His exact words, "I raised one daughter who loves us and one who loves herself." I hung up and didn't speak to anyone for 2 days. Then the holidays stopped, including me entirely. Thanksgiving. Dad's knee is acting up, probably better if you don't make the trip. Christmas. Sandra has a whole thing planned, it might be too crowded. Easter. Silence. No call. No text. But through Grace I knew the truth. The house was full every holiday. Cousins drove in from Houston and San Antonio. Uncle Pete brought his famous ribs. The neighbors came for dessert. The whole family was there. Everyone except me. Sandra had placed herself between me and my own parents, and nobody questioned it, because as far as they knew, she was the one holding everything together. And every month I kept paying. The balance dropped from $98,000 to $70,000. Then $45,000. Then $20,000. I watched the numbers fall on my banking app like a slow countdown, not to something beginning but to something ending. One night Marcus and I were doing dishes and he asked quietly, "When does this stop, Clara?" I dried a mug and set it on the shelf. "When it's paid off. When I know they're safe." He looked at me the way he sometimes did, like he could see exactly what it was costing me and wished he could carry part of it. "Is knowing they're safe enough for you?" I didn't answer. The final payment cleared in November. 4 years, 48 monthly transfers. $112,000 total. The house on Crestwood Lane was paid in full, owned outright by Robert and Helen Bennett. 3 weeks later I got something I hadn't expected. Not an invitation exactly. More like an announcement I wasn't meant to see. I was scrolling on a Sunday afternoon when Sandra's post appeared on my screen. Public, bright, festive. Planning mom and dad's 35th anniversary celebration. Family only, December 10th. It's going to be so beautiful. 180 likes. 30-some comments. Cousins tagging each other. Neighbors asking what to bring. Uncle Pete promising to come down from Dallas. No message to me. No call. I sat with my phone for a long time. Then I called Sandra. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey." I saw the post. "When should I come?" Silence. Then, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to make the drive. It's their 35th anniversary, Sandra." "I know, but Dad said he doesn't want anything uncomfortable." "Did Dad say that, or did you?" A longer pause. I could almost hear her recalculating. "I'm just trying to protect everyone." "From what?" "From me showing up to my own parents' anniversary party?" "Claire, you haven't been around. People will ask questions. Let them ask." She exhaled through her teeth. "I just don't want this to become a whole thing. I'll be there." I hung up. My hands were trembling. Not from anger, from something older than that. 4 years of silence. And my sister was still deciding whether I existed. That night I lay on the ceiling of my bedroom staring up at nothing. Marcus rolled over and said, "You're going, aren't you?" "Yeah." "Good." Pause. "What are you bringing?" I thought about it for 1 second. The truth. He didn't ask what I meant. I think he already understood. Somewhere in the dark of that room, something inside me shifted from hoping to deciding. You don't get to write me out of my own family, Sandra. Not anymore. The next morning I called James Wyatt at Lone Star Savings. "James, it's Clara Bennett." "Clara, great to hear from you. Congratulations on that final payment. It cleared perfectly. That's actually why I'm calling." I paused. "I need the mortgage satisfaction certificate and a complete record of every payment made over the past 4 years. Every transaction. Every date. My name on all of it." A brief quiet. "You sure? That's going to show everything." "That's exactly why I want it. Give me a few days. I'll have it notarized and ready." The envelope arrived the following week. Thick, official, the Lone Star Savings seal on the front. Inside, the payoff certificate, crisp and stamped. Behind it, 48 pages of transaction records. My name on every line. I also wrote a letter. 1 page, handwritten on plain paper. I won't tell you everything it said, not yet. But I'll tell you it took me 3 attempts to finish it without stopping. When I finally sealed it, my hands were still. I put everything into a sturdy box from the craft store on Pike Street. Then I wrapped it in silver ribbon. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because silver was the color of my parents' 35th anniversary. The metal anniversary. I thought Mom would remember. The morning I left, Marcus walked me to the car. He held my overnight bag while I stood there with the silver box tucked under my arm. "Whatever happens," he said, "you already did the right thing." 4 years of the right thing. He hugged me and I pulled onto the freeway. I didn't know I'd be back before the following evening without the box. The drive from Seattle to Milford was 11 hours. I stopped twice. I kept the box on the passenger seat with my hand resting on it whenever the road was straight. Texas appeared slowly the way it always does. The sky getting wider, the land flattening out, the water towers marking each small town from miles away. I passed the grain elevator at the edge of Milford, the same one I'd ridden my bike past 1,000 times as a kid, and turned onto Crestwood Lane at 3:40 in the afternoon. There was the house. Same pale green siding, same wooden porch, same cracked stepping stone I'd asked Dad to fix in 2015. But today, silver and white balloons were tied to the fence post. A banner stretched across the porch railing. Happy 35th, Robert and Helen. Cars filled both sides of the street. I counted at least 15. I parked at the corner, cut the engine and sat. Through the front window I could see movement. Hear music. Something soft and country, just loud enough to bleed through the glass. Laughter. The layered noise of a room full of people. Maybe 50 inside and not one of them expecting me. I looked at the silver box on the passenger seat. One corner of the ribbon had shifted during the drive. I straightened it. What if they still don't want me there? What if nothing changes? I sat for 8 minutes. Watched the late afternoon light move through the pecan tree in the front yard. The same one Dad hung a tire swing from when I was 6. Then I picked up the box, got out of the car and walked toward the front door. The living room had been rearranged. Folding tables draped in white linen formed a long row down the center. Borrowed chairs lined the walls. Flowers on every flat surface. A photo slideshow ran from a laptop in the corner. Images of Mom and Dad through the years. I appeared in very few of them. A few heads turned. Then more. Mrs. Calloway from next door was the first to speak. Clara Bennett. My goodness, we haven't seen you in years. She said it at full volume. Conversations dropped. Forks paused. Eyes moved from me to the silver box, then back to me. I scanned the room. Uncle Pete near the food table. Cousin Denise by the window. A dozen faces I half recognized. Then I found her. Aunt Grace. She was standing near the kitchen doorway holding a glass of water, and the moment our eyes met, her hand froze. Her gaze dropped to the box in my arms and her eyes went wide. He knew. She knew exactly what I was carrying. 5 years of quiet passed between us in a single look. I could see the question on her face. Are you sure? I gave a small nod. Grace set her glass down slowly. Then she nodded back. Just once. Firm. The low hum of the room rebuilt itself around a new frequency. Something unexpected had entered and everyone felt it, even if they couldn't name it yet. Sandra was mid-toast when she saw me. She was standing at the head of the table with a champagne flute, wrapping up what sounded like the final lines of a prepared speech. And I'm just so grateful I could give back to the 2 people who gave me everything. Whatever I did it out of love. Applause. Raised glasses. Dad nodded from his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a man receiving something he believed he was owed. Then Sandra's eyes drifted past the room and found me. The change was instant but subtle. She was too composed for anything dramatic. Just a tightening at the corners of her mouth, a half-second recalibration, and then the smile came back wider than before. She set down her glass and walked toward me, every step measured. When she got close, she leaned in without embracing me. What are you doing here? I told you Dad doesn't want this. I came to give Mom and Dad their gift, I said. My voice was steady. My hands were not. Sandra's eyes dropped to the silver box. What is that? Something from a gift shop on the way in. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. You should go before it gets awkward. But it was already too late. Across the room, Dad had turned in his chair. And Mom, sitting beside him, was already watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Surprise or something more complicated. Something she quickly covered over. I remembered what James Wyatt had said when he handed me the documents. Miss Bennett, in 20 years at this bank, I have rarely seen anything like what you did. Your parents are fortunate people. Standing in that living room, watching my sister move to block my path while my father's expression closed like a door swinging shut. Fortunate felt like a word from a completely different story. But I kept walking. Mom saw me before Dad said anything. She was sitting to his right, her hands folded on the paper napkin she'd creased into a small square, the same nervous habit she'd had my entire life. When our eyes met, something crossed her face. Something real for just a half second. Then it was gone. She stopped herself. Clara. Her voice was low. We didn't invite you. Sandra organized this. 50 people heard it. I knew because I felt every set of eyes settle on me at once. The silence wasn't empty. It was weighted. It pressed against my skin like something physical. I know, I said. I came anyway. I have something for you and Dad. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at me. What I hoped to see on his face. Something open, something curious. Wasn't there. What was there was stone. His jaw set flat. His eyes narrow. His arms crossed over his chest like a barrier. He didn't speak, but his posture said everything. Behind me I could feel Sandra moving closer. Beside me, 50 people deciding whether to look away or lean in. Aunt Grace hadn't moved from her spot near the kitchen. I could feel her watching me the way a lighthouse watches a boat in rough water. I took another step toward the table, toward my parents. The silver box felt heavier than it had in the car. I didn't come to cause any trouble, I said. I came because it's your 35th anniversary and I am your daughter. Dad's eyes fell to the box. His jaw tightened. I set it on the table, right between the flower arrangement and the anniversary cake with its silver frosting lettering. The ribbon caught the overhead light for just a moment like something precious. Dad stared at it. His jaw worked slowly, the way it always had when he was building toward something. Then he reached out and pushed it. Not a nudge, a deliberate open palm shove that sent the box sliding across the tablecloth and off the edge. It landed on the floor with a dull, flat sound. One end of the silver ribbon tore loose. The room inhaled. "We don't need anything from you." Dad's voice was loud enough for the back row, for the cousins, for the neighbors, for the people near the door. He wanted the room to hear it. "You show up when it suits you. Disappear for years. And you think walking in here with a box makes it right? Sandra has been here. Sandra paid for this house. Sandra planned this party. Sandra showed up. Where were you all this time?" Sandra stood behind him, arms folded, chin raised. She didn't speak. He didn't need to. Her expression said everything. That practiced look of someone who has already won and is simply watching the other side arrive at the realization. A few guests shifted in their seats. Mrs. Calloway looked down at her plate. Uncle Pete set his fork down. Cousin Denise took half a step backward. I looked at my father. My throat was tight. My eyes were burning. But my voice when it came was level. "I didn't come here to beg," I said. "I came to give you something I spent 4 years working for. But I won't stand here and be humiliated for loving you." I bent down and picked up the box. I smoothed the torn ribbon back into place with my thumb, carefully, the way you'd fix something fragile. I took my time. The whole room watched. Then I stood up. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at Sandra. Then I turned around and walked out. Past the folding chairs. Past the slideshow still cycling through photos. Past Uncle Pete with his hands flat on his knees. Past Mrs. Calloway pressing a napkin to her mouth. 50 people and not one of them said a word. Not one of them stood up. The only sounds were my footsteps on the hardwood and the soft country songs still drifting from the speaker in the corner, completely indifferent to what had just happened. Aunt Grace was near the front door. When I reached her, she caught my arm. Not hard, just enough. She looked at the box. Then at me. Her eyes were fierce and full. "Leave it with me," she whispered. "Trust me, Claire." I hesitated. Everything in me wanted to take it home, put it in a closet and never think about Milford again. But Grace's hand was steady. And her eyes said what her voice didn't. "I have been quiet long enough." I placed the silver box in her hands. Then I walked through the front door, down the porch steps and into the cold December air. I didn't look back. But I heard it, my mother saying my name. Just once. Softly. And then silence. Driving back toward the highway, I kept asking myself why I'd kept hoping. For years. $112,000. A box shoved off a table and a door that didn't open. Have you ever given everything to someone who looked straight past it and thanked someone else instead? What would you have done? Would you have left the box or taken it home with you? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. I was already past the county line when it started. I didn't see it happen. But Grace told me everything later in detail. And Grace is not a woman who embroiders things. So when she described what happened in that living room after I walked out, I believed every word. The party tried to resume. Sandra clapped her hands and said, "Okay, everyone, let's not let this overshadow such a special night. Who wants to cut the cake?" A few people murmured. Someone picked up a fork. The music kept playing. Grace didn't move. She stood near the center of the room holding my silver box, watching the gathering try to reassemble itself. She told me later she felt like she was holding a lit match in a room full of paper. 4 years of someone else's lie sitting right there in her hands. She walked to the middle of the table and set the box down, the same table Dad had shoved it off of minutes before. "Before anyone touches that cake," she said, "there's something everyone here needs to see." Dad's head came up immediately. "Grace, leave it alone." "No." She looked directly at him. I've left it alone for 4 years. That ends tonight. Sandra moved fast. Aunt Grace, this is not the time. This is exactly the time, Sandra. The room went utterly still. Not quiet, still. As if the air itself stopped. Grace opened the box. Inside, the envelope from Lone Star Savings, the sealed letter, everything I had carried 6 hours across state lines. She pulled out the bank envelope first, held it up so the room could see the return address. Then she opened it. She unfolded the certificate and held it at arm's length. She'd already put her reading glasses on, Grace told me later, while she was still walking to the table. Like she'd been rehearsing this moment for years. Maybe she had. She read it aloud. Every word. Mortgage satisfaction certificate, 114 Crestwood Lane, Milford, Texas. Paid in full as of November 8th. Payment completed by. She paused. Looked at Dad. Then at the room. Clara Rose Bennett. Total paid, $112,000. Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind from before. This was something different. This was 50 people understanding all at once that the story they'd been living inside was not the real one. Grace reached back into the envelope and lifted out a stack of papers. 48 pages. She fanned through them slowly. 4 years of payments, she said. $1,400 every single month. From Clara's account in Seattle. Her name. Her money. Every line. Someone in the back of the room whispered something. Mrs. Calloway covered her mouth with both hands. Uncle Pete pushed his chair back from the table. Cousin Denise stood very still, her eyes fixed on Sandra. Dad hadn't moved. The hand that had shoved the box off the table was gripping the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Mom pressed both palms flat over her face. Her shoulders began to shake before any sound came out. And then the sound came, the kind of crying that has no interest in being quiet. Grace lowered the papers. She looked at Dad. This is what was inside the gift you pushed onto the floor. 4 years. $112,000. From the daughter you said chose herself. Nobody breathed. Dad turned to Sandra. Grace said his face looked like a man watching the walls of a room he'd trusted suddenly become transparent. Every familiar line rearranging itself around a new and devastating understanding. You told me you were paying for this house. His voice was flat in a way that was far more frightening than loud. Sandra had gone the color of old chalk. Something behind her eyes had simply switched off. I helped, she said. I contributed in other ways. Grace didn't flinch. Dave Wyatt at Lone Star confirmed that every payment, every one, came from a single account. Clara's. Not a single dollar from you, Sandra. Pause. Not one. That's not what Sandra started. A voice from near the window. Aunt Donna. Dad's older sister, 72 years old, sharp as a paring knife. What ways exactly, Sandra? Sandra opened her mouth. Closed it. The room waited. Nothing came out. And then the room turned. You could feel it, like a tide pulling back before it reverses. The people who'd been raising their glasses to Sandra's toast 20 minutes earlier were now watching her with the particular look you reserve for someone you've just realized you never actually knew. Uncle Pete shook his head slowly. Mrs. Calloway wouldn't look in Sandra's direction. Cousin Denise crossed her arms. Sandra took one step back. Then another. No one moved toward her. No one spoke a word in her defense. The silence around her was absolute. At some point during what came next, she took her coat from the back of a chair and slipped out through the kitchen. Nobody noticed her go. Grace reached into the box one final time. There's one more thing, she said. My white envelope. My handwriting on the front. Mom and Dad. Grace looked at Dad. Do you want to read this yourself or should I? Dad didn't answer. His hands were shaking too badly to hold paper. Mom was still crying. The quiet kind now, the kind that comes after the loud kind has worn itself out. Grace opened the letter. She read slowly. She told me later she couldn't get through all of it without her own voice breaking, so she gave them the parts that mattered most. Mom and Dad, I know you believe I left because I didn't care. But I left so I could take care of you from a place where I was strong enough to. This house is yours. It always was. I just made sure no one could take it from you. Grace paused. Steadied herself. I love you. Always have. Even when you didn't see me. She folded the letter and placed it on the table in front of Dad. The room was undone. There is no other word for it. Several of the older women were pressing napkins to their eyes. Uncle Pete had bowed his head. Two of the neighbors quietly excused themselves, not out of disrespect, but because they understood this was no longer a moment that belonged to them. Mom reached across the table and rested her fingertips against the letter. Gently, the way you'd touch something you were afraid might disappear. Dad sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He looked like a man who had aged a full decade in 15 minutes. Mr. Holloway, the neighbor from across the street who had known my parents since before I was born, stopped at the door on his way out. He put his hand on Dad's shoulder. You know, Robert, he said, I always thought Clara was the quiet one. Turns out quiet and gone aren't the same thing. Dad didn't look up. After the guests left, slowly in small groups, murmuring things like beautiful evening that nobody believed, it was just my parents at the table. Paper plates. Cold food. The banner still hanging across the porch. And a letter from a daughter they hadn't properly spoken to in years, lying open between them. Grace told me they sat there for nearly 3 hours. Mom kept her hand on the letter the whole time. Dad read the bank statements, all 48 pages, running his finger down each column. My name, repeated 48 times, like a pulse he'd been too distracted to notice. Around midnight, Dad spoke. I pushed it off the table, Helen. His voice cracked on the last word. I pushed our own daughter's heart off the table. Grace called Mom the next morning. Mom told her it was the first time in 35 years of marriage she'd heard Robert Bennett cry. Not tear up, cry. Mom put her hand over his. Then we drive, she said. It's 11 hours. Then we leave now. Something passed between them, not words, not even a decision. More like a surrender. The kind that happens when you stop resisting something you already know is true. At 2:30 in the morning, Dad backed his truck out of the driveway and Mom climbed in with a thermos of coffee and the silver box, re-ribboned by Grace before she left for the night. They pulled onto the highway heading west. No call ahead. No text. Just drove. Texas. New Mexico. Arizona. Nevada. Oregon. Washington. 11 hours. Mile by mile in the dark. At that exact moment I was 30,000 feet in the air flying back to Seattle, watching the empty seat beside me where a silver box had been. Marcus was waiting at the arrivals gate when I walked out. He didn't ask how it went. He could see it. He just picked up my bag, put his arm around my shoulders and walked me to the car. We drove home in silence, not uncomfortable silence. The kind that exists between two people when words would only make the weight heavier. When we got inside, I sat down on the couch without taking off my jacket. Didn't turn on the lights. Marcus locked the door and put the kettle on. And then it hit me, not slowly, not like something building, but like a wall coming down all at once. I pressed my face into the cushion and cried the way I hadn't cried since I was a child. Graceless. Shaking. Loud. Marcus sat beside me. Put his hand on my back. Said nothing. Not it's okay. Not you deserve better. None of the things people reach for when they don't know what else to give. He just stayed. The next morning I did what I always do. Up at 5:30. Coffee. Front porch in my robe, bare feet on cold wood, watching the Seattle sky go from black to gray to the particular pale blue that comes just before the clouds roll back in. Was I wrong to go? Was I wrong to hope? And then at exactly 7:12 in the morning, I heard a vehicle slow down in front of the house. I didn't recognize the truck at first. A dusty white pickup, road grime on the wheel wells, Texas plates. It parked at an odd angle. The kind of angle that happens when someone has been driving all night and doesn't fully register that they've arrived. The engine went quiet. The driver's door opened. My father stepped out. Robert Bennett, 62 years old, in the same flannel shirt from the party, eyes red and swollen, hair pushed flat on one side from a night of leaning against a headrest. He looked like a man who had driven straight through his own reckoning and come out the other side older. Mom came around from the passenger side. She was holding the silver box against her chest, re-ribboned, the torn end patched with fresh tape, clutching it like she was afraid to let it go. They stood at the end of my front path. 20 feet of concrete between us. Dad's hands were at his sides. His mouth was moving slightly, like he'd been rehearsing something the whole drive, and now that he'd arrived every version of it had disappeared. I stayed on the porch, coffee in hand, barefoot on cold wood. We looked at each other. A dog barked somewhere on the block. A sprinkler started up 2 houses down. The whole ordinary world kept going while we stood still. Then my father spoke. His voice was stripped to the bone. I'm sorry, Clara. 3 words. 7 letters. The 3 words I had waited my entire life to hear from that man. He swallowed. Tried again. I shoved away the only person who was actually holding us up. I didn't run to him. I didn't collapse. I stood on my porch with my coffee going cold and I let those words settle where they needed to settle. Mom came up the walkway first, the box still held against her, tears already falling, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. She didn't come up. She waited. I knew, she said. Her voice was barely there. Somewhere underneath everything, I knew Sandra wasn't telling the truth. I saw things that didn't add up. But I told myself it wasn't my place. I was scared of losing your father's peace, scared of losing Sandra. She looked up at me. I sat there while he pushed your gift off that table in front of everyone, Clara. I just sat there. I will never forgive myself for that. I know, Mom. I won't, she said again. Quieter. I looked at her for a long moment. At the box in her arms, at the careful tape on the ribbon's corner, at the circles beneath her eyes. Then I stepped aside and held the door open. Come in, I said. Both of you. It wasn't warm, I want to be honest about that. I didn't fall into anyone's arms. I made tea. I set out mugs. I moved through my own kitchen with the steadiness of someone who had spent 4 years caring for people without being seen for it, and I let that rhythm carry me because it was the only thing keeping my hands from trembling. Marcus came out, said a quiet hello, shook Dad's hand and went back to his study. He knew this wasn't his conversation. We sat at my kitchen table, the $12 thrift store table I'd eaten 1,000 solitary dinners at, and I said the thing I'd been carrying longer than the mortgage. I love you. But I will not go back to being invisible. Mom nodded, fast and broken. Dad looked at his hands. I'm glad you came, I said. But showing up once doesn't erase 4 years of silence. Dad nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't tell me I was being unreasonable. That, more than the apology, told me something had actually shifted. Over the next hour they told me what had happened since I left the party. The news had moved through Milford the way news moves in a small town. Fast, thorough, and without mercy. By Saturday morning, half the town knew Sandra Mitchell had been taking credit for someone else's sacrifice. By Sunday the other half knew. People didn't confront Sandra directly. They didn't need to. They just stopped calling. Stopped waving. Stopped saving her a spot at the table. In a town of 3,000, silence is its own verdict. Dad told me he'd gone to the bank on Tuesday and had Sandra removed from every shared account. Sat across from James Wyatt, who handled it calmly and without ceremony. She had access to things she shouldn't have, Dad said. That's on me. They'd also contacted an attorney to review everything Sandra had touched. He said it was precautionary. The look on his face said he was afraid of what they'd find. Sandra, for her part, sent the entire extended family a long group message 3 days after the party. A winding account of how Grace had twisted the situation and turned everyone against her. She described herself as the real victim. Nobody replied. Grace sent me a screenshot and a single line. The whole town's talking, Clara. Not about the money. About who you are. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and went to work. Before they left, I sat them down one more time. The tea was cold. The morning had moved across the kitchen floor and reached the far wall. We'd been talking for 3 hours. Now it was my turn. If we're going to rebuild this, I need a few things. Dad sat up straight. Mom folded her hands. I need you to call me regularly. Not only when something goes wrong. Not because you feel guilty. Because you want to. Dad nodded. I need you to stop letting one person decide who belongs in this family. That goes for Sandra and for anyone else. Another nod. And I need you to never let anyone speak for me again. If you want to know what I think or how I feel, ask me. Not my sister. Not a neighbor. Me. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. From the study faintly came the sound of Marcus typing. Dad cleared his throat. Stopped. Started again. Can I hug you? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had once said one less mouth on my birthday. Who had shoved my gift off a table in front of 50 people. Who had driven 11 hours through the night red-eyed and undone, to stand at the end of my front path and say 3 words. I got up, walked around the table and let him hold me. It wasn't forgiveness yet. I want to be clear about that. It was a door I chose to leave open. And there is a difference. I don't need you to make up for the past, I said into his shoulder. I just need you to show up for whatever comes next. He held on tighter. That was 4 months ago. Dad calls every Sunday now. 6 o'clock without fail. Sometimes we talk for an hour. Sometimes it's 15 minutes about the weather and what Marcus is working on, but he calls. Every single week. He hasn't missed one. Mom sends cards in the mail. Short notes on the pale blue stationery she's kept in her desk drawer since I was young. Thinking of you today. Heard a mockingbird this morning and remembered how much you loved them as a little girl. Small things. Real things. They flew to Seattle for Thanksgiving. First time either of them had been on a plane in over 15 years. Dad gripped his armrest the entire flight. Mom packed homemade pecan cookies in a tin wrapped with 3 layers of bubble wrap. We ate dinner at my $12 thrift store table, and nobody mentioned the empty chair where Sandra might have been. As for Sandra, people ask. I haven't cut her off. That's not what this is. I stopped chasing. If she decides she wants to be honest and be in my life, she knows where to find me. But she doesn't get to tell my story anymore. I went back to work at the school the week after everything happened. Clocked in, checked in with students, sat through staff meetings. The world doesn't pause because your family finally sees you. It just keeps going and you go with it. One evening Marcus and I were washing dishes. Same spot, same kitchen, same quiet, and he asked, "So was it worth it?" All 4 years. I set a plate on the drying rack. I'm not telling you to spend 4 years quietly paying off someone's debts to earn their love. That's not what I want you to take from this. The lesson is simpler than that. Don't let anyone convince you that your kindness is a weakness. And don't ever let anyone else narrate your story. I didn't win my parents back with money. I won them back by refusing to disappear. When I tell this story, I still wonder, should I have told the truth sooner? If I'd called 4 years ago and said, "It's me, I'm the one paying your mortgage," maybe none of this would have happened. Or maybe Sandra would have found a way to twist that too. I've gone back and forth on it 100 times and I still don't have a clean answer. What do you think? Should I have told them from the start, or was keeping it quiet the right call? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what you'd have done differently. That's my story. Whether you've been the Clara in your family or you know someone who has, I hope it reminds you that being quiet doesn't make you weak. Sometimes the people who make the least noise are carrying the most weight. If this story meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe. And if you want another story about someone who refused to be written off, there's a link in the description. I picked it just for you. Thank you for staying with me all the way through. I'll see you in the next one.